At his 60th birthday celebration, surrounded by friends and family, Peter thought his secrets were safe until she walked into the room. His wife had no idea, but everything was about to change. What began as a moment of celebration turned into a shocking revelation that no one saw coming. Join us as we uncover the truth behind a twisted affair, a betrayal that would destroy a marriage, and a deadly secret no one expected. This is a story of love, lies, and murder that you won't be able to stop watching. You won't believe what happened next. Anna had spent the morning preparing for Peter's 60th birthday celebration, though her heart wasn't in it. The house was decorated with silver and gold balloons, their weightless gleam against the dark wood of the old dining table mocking the weight in her chest. She adjusted the silverware for the 100th time, trying to perfect the arrangement, but each shift of a fork felt more futile than the last. Her fingers brushed over a set of old photographs, collecting dust in an album she hadn't opened in years. She paused, her gaze lingering on one particular photo from their early days together. Peter, young and carefree, smiling widely as they stood on a beach in the late summer, a time before their marriage had grown frayed with routine and secrets. She wondered, for the first time in years, if he even remembered that version of himself, the man she had fallen in love with. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Peter's voice downstairs, carrying in the distance, cheerful and distant, as if nothing were wrong in the world. He was downstairs, overseeing the last-minute preparations for his party, his grand, attention-grabbing party. Peter had always thrived in the spotlight. He was successful, admired, even adored by his colleagues. And yet, despite his accolades, Anna had always felt like an afterthought in their marriage, her needs and desires overshadowed by his. It had been years since their connection had felt alive. Now it felt more like an arrangement. Even his birthday was more about the spectacle than about the person it was supposed to honor. As she arranged the flowers in the vase, Anna's eyes drifted toward the kitchen counter, where Peter's phone lay carelessly, face up, its screen glowing faintly. She hesitated, her hand hovering over it for a moment before she pushed the thought aside. Trust was fragile now, a thin thread barely holding the fabric of their marriage together, but she had no real reason to doubt him, or so she told herself. A sudden ping from the phone jolted her back to the present. She glanced at it again. A message from an unknown number. Strange, considering Peter didn't usually entertain text conversations with strangers. Her curiosity won over. The message was brief, almost cryptic. "Can't wait to see you tonight. I'll be there, like we planned." Anna's breath caught in her throat. Her hand shook as she reached for the phone. She knew she should look away, but something deep inside urged her to investigate. She unlocked the screen and opened the conversation. The messages were sparse, but they were enough. A shared intimacy, something that went beyond casual acquaintance. Her heart sank as she read the familiar name, Tina, signed at the end of the last message. Tina was the nurse who had been assigned to oversee Peter's medical checkups over the past few months. He'd spoken about her a few times, always in passing, his praise never overt. But now there was something more to those passing mentions, something darker. She scrolled back further. Their exchanges grew more frequent, more personal, until it became undeniable. Tina wasn't just a nurse. She was something else, something far more intimate than Anna had ever imagined. The pit in Anna's stomach deepened. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, but instead her fingers hovered over the screen. The last message from Tina read, "I miss you. I'll be waiting at the party, just like we agreed." The blood drained from Anna's face. The party. This party. Peter had promised her it would be special, his big birthday bash, the one everyone in their circle had been talking about for weeks. It was meant to be a celebration, a way to mark the passage of time, to make everything feel important. But now it felt like nothing more than a stage for his betrayal. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. She dropped the phone on the counter as if it had burned her. She wasn't ready for this. Not yet. Not today. She took a deep breath and walked towards the door, trying to steady her nerves, but her mind was racing. The truth was staring her in the face now, undeniable and cruel. She couldn't avoid it any longer. "Anna, darling, are you ready?" Peter's voice boomed from the hallway, followed by the sound of his footsteps. His voice, the one she had once loved, felt like an intrusion now, a reminder of everything she was about to lose. She forced a smile as she opened the door. He stood there, tall and proud, holding a glass of champagne in one hand. His eyes sparkled with excitement, as if nothing had changed, as if they hadn't just been through this unspeakable moment together. "I think everything is ready," he said, his smile wide and genuine, though Anna could see the small hints of tension around his eyes. Was he hiding something? Did he know she knew? "Everything looks beautiful," she replied, her voice steady, though her hands were shaking. She stepped aside to let him enter, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. Peter didn't notice. He was too busy admiring the decorations, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath Anna's calm exterior. "Do you think we have enough champagne?" he asked, glancing toward the table where the bottles were neatly arranged. He didn't notice the strain in her voice when she replied. "It's fine, Peter," she said, forcing the words out. "Everything's fine." But everything wasn't fine. It was far from fine, and the longer she spent in his presence, the more she realized how little she actually knew about the man standing before her, how little he had ever shared with her, even after all these years. How could she have been so blind? She knew what she had to do, but she wasn't sure if she was ready. As she prepared herself for what was coming next, a quiet thought echoed in her mind. Was it better to confront him now, or let it unfold on its own at the party? The party that was supposed to celebrate him, his life, his legacy. The party that now felt like a funeral march. With a slow, deliberate movement, Anna turned toward the kitchen, where the phone lay forgotten on the counter. She picked it up again, her hands now steady, and read through the messages once more. It wasn't just a one-time thing. This affair had been going on for months. She didn't know how much of their life together had been a lie, but she had to find out. There were no more games left to play. She had to confront Peter, but the question still gnawed at her. How would she do it? And then, as if the universe were forcing her hand, the doorbell rang. The first guests had arrived. The show, as Peter liked to call it, was about to begin. Anna glanced at the phone one last time before slipping it into her pocket. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked toward the door, her steps slow but sure. Peter's smile, his hand still holding his champagne glass, greeted her at the threshold. "Let's make this a night to remember, darling," he said. And in that moment, Anna wondered just how much of that night would be a memory they would all want to forget. The party was in full swing when Anna stepped into the grand ballroom, the air thick with laughter, chatter, and the clinking of glasses. The room was a stunning display of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the polished wood floors, and tables were adorned with white lilies and orchids, their fragrance nearly overpowering. It was everything Peter had wanted, elegant, lavish, the kind of spectacle that made people take notice. Anna stood by the entrance, watching the crowd with a mixture of disbelief and resignation. The house was filled with friends, family, and colleagues, all gathered to celebrate Peter's milestone, all unaware of the dark undercurrent that was poisoning the very foundation of this perfect evening. Peter was the life of the party, as always, laughing too loudly, gesturing with too much animation. He wore his usual suit, a well-tailored black jacket and silver tie that glinted under the lights. But his smile seemed rehearsed, a mask over something deeper, something more desperate. The guests milled about, drinking champagne, congratulating Peter, but Anna couldn't help but feel like an outsider in her own life. She had seen Peter's charm countless times, watched him light up rooms, but tonight it felt hollow. Her mind raced as she scanned the crowd, hoping to find Tina in the throng of people. It wasn't that she knew exactly who to look for. She hadn't seen the nurse outside of a few brief mentions from Peter, but something about tonight, the whispers in her head, told her Tina would be there. She spotted her first by accident. Tina stood near the bar, her back turned, talking to one of Peter's business associates. Even from across the room, Anna could sense the magnetism between them. Tina had that energy, vibrant, youthful, the kind of beauty that drew people in. Her long hair cascaded in waves, and her dress, a deep shade of emerald, clung to her slender frame, making her appear even more out of place in the sterile world of Peter's professional friends. Anna's heart skipped a beat, a wave of nausea sweeping over her as she locked eyes with the woman. There was no mistake. Tina was here, and she was part of the carefully constructed lie that had been woven over the last several months. Anna took a steadying breath. She wasn't sure if it was the weight of her suspicions or the oppressive nature of the evening, but everything seemed to slow down. Her fingers curled into the fabric of her dress, the anger starting to build, a quiet fury that threatened to break free. She had known, on some level, that this moment would come. The universe had conspired to push her to the edge. The phone call, the message, the stolen moments, the knowing glances, they had all led her to this. And now she had to confront him. There was no turning back. As she watched Tina laugh with Peter's colleague, Anna felt a pang of bitterness. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the fact that Peter had betrayed her, or the fact that he'd let a stranger take the place of the woman who had stood by him for over 3 decades. A cold shiver ran through her as she realized something else. She wasn't just angry with Peter, she was angry with herself. She had known something was wrong. She had seen the signs, felt the distance growing between them, but had ignored it. She had convinced herself that the life they had built was enough. But now, standing in this room, watching Peter charm the crowd, Anna understood the painful truth. She was the last to know. And that thought cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. Her eyes followed Peter as he moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments, and laughing with friends, none the wiser to the storm brewing in the heart of his wife. And then, in the middle of it all, she saw him, Peter, with Tina. He had approached her from behind, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder as she turned to face him. They exchanged a smile, a look that was just a little too intimate for Anna's liking, and Anna felt the blood drain from her face. It was the look of 2 people who had crossed a line that was so far beyond anything Anna had ever imagined. Peter caught Anna's eye across the room, and his smile faltered for a fraction of a second. But he recovered quickly, gesturing toward her with a wide grin. "Anna, sweetheart," he called, his voice just a bit too loud. "Come meet everyone. They're dying to meet you." She nodded, her movements slow as she turned to face him. She felt the weight of every eye in the room on her as she walked toward him, her steps deliberate, though her heart pounded in her chest. It wasn't just the fact that she was about to confront him about the affair. It was the realization that she had been living in a lie for so long that she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Peter introduced her to a few of his colleagues, and she offered her best smile, but it felt like a mask. She was barely aware of the conversation, nodding politely, her mind a whirl of confusion and anger. She couldn't concentrate on anything but the image of Peter and Tina, standing there together like they were the only ones in the room. The party felt like it was spinning out of control. When the moment finally came, when they were alone again, away from the eyes of the guests, Anna barely knew where to start. Peter, for all his charm, hadn't even noticed how far she had fallen from the woman he once knew. He took her hand in his fingers warm against her skin, and said something about how wonderful the night had been so far. He was oblivious to the storm brewing just below the surface of Anna's calm exterior. She yanked her hand away, the sharp movement catching him off guard. He looked at her, a flicker of confusion crossing his face, but before he could speak, Anna cut him off. "You need to stop pretending," she said, her voice quiet but fierce, cutting through the music and laughter that still echoed in the background. "Stop pretending that nothing is wrong. I know about Tina." Peter's face paled for a moment, his expression freezing, but then he recovered, offering a forced laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "What are you talking about, Anna? I know about the texts," she interrupted, her words now coming faster, fueled by a rush of emotion. "I know about everything. The secret meetings, the lies. How long, Peter? How long have you been seeing her?" He took a step back, his hand running through his hair in a nervous gesture. "Anna, look, it's not what you think. It was a mistake, okay? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have—" "A mistake?" she repeated, her voice rising. "A mistake? Peter, you've been seeing her for months. You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught. How could you do this to me? To us?" The words were out before she could stop them, the floodgates opening. Years of resentment, years of silence poured out of her in that one breathless moment. She felt like a stranger in her own life, in her own marriage. Peter was silent now, looking at her as if she were some kind of puzzle he couldn't quite figure out. The easy, charming mask he had worn for so long was gone. He was no longer the confident, smiling husband. He was just a man who had been caught in a lie too big to deny. "You don't even know what you've done, do you?" Anna continued, her voice shaking now, her anger turning into something deeper, something darker. "All these years I've stood by you, I've protected you, I've loved you, and now this. With her." Peter opened his mouth to speak, but Anna wasn't done. She wasn't sure when the line had crossed from betrayal to fury, but it had, and there was no going back. "I want you to leave," she said suddenly, her words coming out like a command rather than a plea. "Leave. This is over." For a moment Peter looked at her, and something passed across his face. Regret, disbelief, maybe even guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. He stood frozen, unsure of what to do, and for the first time Anna realized that she had stopped needing him. The silence between them was suffocating. Then, as if the weight of everything had suddenly become too much to bear, Peter turned and walked away without another word. Anna watched him go, her chest tight with a mixture of relief and devastation. But as she watched him disappear into the crowd, she felt something inside her shift. This wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about reclaiming herself. It was about standing up for the woman she had lost in the shadow of his lies. The party continued without interruption, the music swelling, the chatter rising again, as if nothing had changed. But for Anna, everything had shifted. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood alone, her fingers gripping the back of a chair, her eyes tracing the crowd in a daze. The silence in the room felt deafening now, every conversation she overheard a cruel reminder of the life she had been living, one built on layers of lies. Peter was somewhere out there, moving through the guests with his usual ease, but Anna could no longer focus on him. Her mind, a chaotic swirl of rage and disbelief, had already begun to move beyond the confrontation. She had confronted him, but what now? She needed answers. She needed closure. It didn't take long for her to find a moment of solitude. She excused herself from the mingling guests and slipped into the quiet of their study, a room that had always been Peter's sanctuary. The familiar smell of leather-bound books and mahogany furniture was oddly comforting now. She sank into the chair behind Peter's desk, her hand trembling as she picked up the photo of them from earlier, the one from their beach trip, their happier years. She stared at it for a long time, as if willing the image to hold some secret that might make sense of what had happened. How had they gotten here? How had Peter, the man who promised her forever, allowed everything they'd built together to crumble? She closed her eyes, the weight of the situation settling in. There were so many unanswered questions. Too many. How long had the affair been going on? Was Tina the only one? Was Peter's infidelity the reason he had pulled away from her in recent months? Or had something else been eating away at their marriage all along? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. She hadn't heard the footsteps approaching. She didn't have to open her eyes to know who it was. "Anna?" Her pulse quickened. It was Peter, his voice barely a whisper through the crack in the door. He hesitated, unsure if he should come in, but Anna didn't respond, didn't invite him in. She was done with polite pretenses. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Peter stepped inside, his face drawn, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He looked like a man trying to hold on to control, but it was slipping from him. The easy charm was gone, replaced by a grim tension. He didn't look at her right away. Instead, his eyes flicked nervously to the floor, the walls, anywhere but her. "I need you to understand something, Anna," he started, his voice tight, as though the words were hard to pull from him. "What happened with Tina? It wasn't meant to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt you." Anna lifted her head, her gaze cold, unwavering. "Then why did you do it?" she asked, her voice low and measured, but with an edge that cut through the tension. "Why did you betray me like this, Peter?" Peter took a deep breath, the sound sharp and almost pained. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was just supposed to be an escape, a way to feel something again." She narrowed her eyes, her breath catching in her throat. "An escape? You've been having an affair with her for months. How is that just an escape?" Her hands clenched into fists on the armrest of the chair, her knuckles white. Peter winced but pressed on. "I know how it sounds. He stopped himself, his jaw tight. "I've been distant from you for a while, Anna. I know that, but I couldn't talk to you about it. I didn't know how to tell you that things between us had changed." The vulnerability in his voice was there, but it didn't move her. How many times had she tried to talk to him? How many nights had they spent in silence, the distance between them growing wider with each passing day? His confession, though raw, only confirmed the things she had already suspected. He hadn't tried to fix it. He had sought comfort somewhere else. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You couldn't talk to me," she repeated, her voice rising with each word. "You couldn't tell me that you were falling out of love with me, that you were unhappy, that you were seeing someone else." Peter took a step toward her, his hands raised in an unspoken plea. "Anna, please listen. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for this to happen. It's just that when I met Tina, she was different. She understood me in a way that I didn't, you mean?" Anna interrupted, her chest tightening. "You were so busy trying to find an escape that you didn't stop to look at what you were doing to me, to us." Peter looked away, his face crumpling as if he were trying to hold back the flood of guilt that had finally caught up with him. "I was stupid," he admitted, his voice strained. "But it was never about you. It was about me, about what I was missing. I didn't even realize how far I had gone until—" He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. "Until you were caught," Anna said bitterly. You didn't realize how far you'd gone until it was too late." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was suffocating. Peter's eyes met hers, and in that instant, Anna saw something she hadn't seen in years: regret. But it was too little, too late. She had seen the man he had become, the man who chose to lie and cheat rather than face his own fears, his own dissatisfaction with their marriage. "You're right," Peter said finally, his voice small, almost broken. "It's too late." He took a long breath and then exhaled slowly, like a man who had resigned himself to the inevitable. "I never wanted to hurt you, Anna. I swear. But I'm not sure what else there is left to say." Anna stood frozen in front of him. The man she had loved for decades, the man she had once trusted without question, was gone. In his place was a stranger, a man who had taken everything, her trust, her love, her sense of self, and shattered it. She had no more words for him, no more tears. "I think we both know this is over," she said quietly, her voice steady, though her heart felt like it was breaking in two. "It's done." Peter nodded, a resigned sigh leaving his lips. He didn't argue, didn't try to convince her otherwise. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, defeated. "I'm sorry, Anna," he murmured one last time. But his apology felt hollow. It didn't matter anymore. Anna's gaze hardened as she turned away from him. She had nothing left to say, nothing left to give. She had spent too long trying to hold on to something that had already fallen apart. Without looking back, she walked toward the door, her hand on the doorknob. But before she could open it, Peter's voice stopped her, raw and desperate. "Anna, what happens now?" She paused, her fingers still gripping the cold metal of the door, and took a moment to gather herself. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost detached. "We move on," she said simply, "but not together." And with that, she opened the door and stepped into the unknown. The days following the confrontation felt like a blur, each one passing in a haze of anger, confusion, and reluctant acceptance. Anna moved through her life as if in a dream, the house she had once loved now a hollow shell. It no longer felt like home. The echoes of Peter's absence were everywhere, in the spaces he used to fill with his laughter, in the empty chair at the dinner table, in the quiet that stretched endlessly through rooms that once bustled with the hum of their shared routines. Now it was just her, alone, and yet, somehow, still waiting. She had expected the grief to hit her harder, to drown her in a storm of sorrow. Instead, it was the silence that crushed her, the lack of a voice, the absence of a presence that had once been so deeply entwined with hers. She felt a strange numbness, like she was walking through her own life as an outsider, unsure of where to go next. Peter had left the day after their confrontation. He didn't make a scene or demand to speak to her again. There were no dramatic gestures, no desperate apologies. He had packed a bag, slung it over his shoulder, and walked out of the door without a second glance. It was as though he had already given up on them long before she had, and now, in the quiet aftermath, she realized just how far gone their marriage had really been. Anna spent the first few days in a kind of shock. She didn't call her friends or family, didn't answer messages or return calls. She didn't know how to explain to them what had happened, or even how to face the world outside. There were moments when she would sit by the window, staring out at the street below, lost in the rhythm of her thoughts, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. She had been so certain that their love was strong, that their years together meant something. But now, all of it, every kiss, every promise, every shared memory, felt like it had been built on quicksand. Nothing had been real. Her thoughts would often drift to Tina, the woman who had been the catalyst for everything. Anna didn't know much about her, just the fleeting glimpses of her at the party. But she couldn't shake the image of Tina's bright eyes and the way she had smiled at Peter. It wasn't just a flirtation, it was something deeper. Tina had been an emotional anchor for Peter in a way Anna could no longer be. The realization was painful, but Anna knew she couldn't focus on Tina. She had to focus on herself now. She threw herself into work, pushing herself to return to normal, but the normalcy was suffocating. The more she tried to occupy her mind with the mundane, the more she felt disconnected from her old life. Even the simplest tasks, grocery shopping, paying bills, felt like monumental challenges. It was as if she was playing a role, pretending to be the woman she used to be, but it was slipping further and further away. But then, just when she thought she couldn't go on in the haze of her own grief, a series of events set everything in motion again. The first came in the form of a letter. It arrived late one evening, its envelope plain and unmarked, with only Peter's handwriting scrawled across the front. Anna stared at the letter for a long time before opening it. She had no idea what he could possibly want now. Was it an apology? A plea for reconciliation? Instead, it was a confession. He wrote that he had left because he knew the marriage was over. But there was more. He had been hiding something Anna had not known. As she read through the words, the unease in her stomach deepened. Peter admitted that his affair with Tina had escalated far beyond what Anna had imagined, but it wasn't just the affair itself that haunted him. It was what he had done in the months leading up to their separation. Anna's fingers shook as she turned the page. Peter had been involved in something far darker than simple infidelity. In the letter, he revealed that he and Tina had been conspiring together, not just to destroy his marriage, but to manipulate his business deals, making financial moves that he knew were unethical, even illegal. He had been embezzling money, funneling it through shell companies. And Tina, it seemed, had been more than a lover. She was his accomplice. Peter's betrayal, it turned out, had been far greater than Anna could have ever imagined. The affair was just the tip of the iceberg. Anna sank back into her chair, the letter slipping from her hands as the weight of his words pressed down on her. How had she not known? How had she not seen the signs of Peter's descent into corruption? All those late nights, the strange phone calls, the sudden trips out of town that he had never fully explained. Now, it all made sense. And the worst part was that Peter had been hiding this from her, even when they had shared everything. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial, illegal, and, ultimately, deadly. As Anna sat in stunned silence, the implications of what Peter had written began to take shape. She knew the next step. She needed to confront him again. But this time, it wouldn't just be about the affair. This time, it would be about the consequences of his actions. The next few days were a blur of frantic calls to lawyers, financial experts, and even the police. The more Anna dug into Peter's secret dealings, the clearer it became that his actions had put both their family and his career at risk. The money he had stolen, the illegal deals he had brokered, everything was tainted. But there was one more thing that Anna had to confront. The letter hadn't been the last piece of Peter's confession. He had one final revelation. Someone had been watching him. Someone had been aware of the embezzling long before Anna found out, and that someone had been trying to blackmail Peter. It was this external pressure, Peter had claimed, that had driven him to take even greater risks. But there was a catch. The letter was written in haste, and one of the final paragraphs was smudged with ink. Peter had written something cryptic, something about a meeting with the blackmailer just days before he left. He had been meeting with someone who was now, quite possibly, a threat to Anna as well. As Anna pieced together the fragments of his confession, she realized she was in danger. The web of lies Peter had woven was deeper and darker than she had ever imagined. The affair, the embezzling, the blackmail, it was all connected, and the threads were pulling tighter with each passing day. The house that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a trap. And Peter, who had disappeared into the night, had left behind a trail of destruction that Anna would have to navigate. And then, as if in response to her rising panic, there came another knock on the door. This time, it wasn't Peter, it was the police. "Mrs. Willard, we need to talk." The world seemed to slow to a crawl as Anna stood at the door, her hand frozen on the handle. The weight of the officer's words hung heavy in the air, and for a moment she couldn't process what was happening. The police, here, for her. The officer's face was impassive, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He wasn't just here for a routine inquiry. Something had gone wrong, something bigger than she could have ever anticipated. "Mrs. Willard, we need to speak with you about your husband," he repeated, his voice gentle but insistent. "Is this a good time?" Her pulse quickened, but she nodded, her throat tight with a sudden fear she couldn't explain. She opened the door fully, allowing the officers to step inside. There were two of them, one tall, with dark hair and an unreadable expression, the other shorter and more approachable, though his eyes betrayed a subtle unease. Anna stepped back, making room for them in the hallway. "Is Peter okay?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it. She regretted it instantly, as if the words were a desperate hope that would somehow make the nightmare stop. The taller officer exchanged a quick look with his partner. "We're not sure yet, Mrs. Willard," he said, his tone even, but with an edge of urgency. "That's actually why we're here." Anna's heart hammered in her chest. She swallowed hard. "What do you mean? Where is he?" "We need to talk to you about his disappearance," the shorter officer said. His eyes softened, and Anna could tell he was trying to approach the situation carefully, but there was no denying the gravity of the situation. "We're investigating a possible connection between your husband's recent activities and a series of troubling events." Anna's mind raced. Peter had disappeared. She hadn't heard from him in days, but she hadn't thought anything of it. After all, he had walked out without a word, without explanation. But now, hearing the word disappearance come from a police officer's mouth made her blood run cold. "Troubling events?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" The taller officer stepped forward, his voice lowering slightly, as if to ensure she understood the severity of what he was about to say. "Mrs. Willard, your husband is under investigation for financial crimes, including embezzlement and money laundering. But that's not all. We have reason to believe that his actions have caught the attention of some very dangerous people. People who are not easily ignored." Anna's knees almost buckled. She grasped the doorframe to steady herself, the room spinning as the officer's words sank in. Peter was in deeper trouble than she had ever imagined, and now she was tangled up in it too. The blackmail Peter had mentioned in his letter, was this what he had meant? Had he been hiding from the people he had stolen from? Was that why he had left so suddenly? "Dangerous people?" she managed to croak. "What are you talking about?" The officer gave a reluctant glance toward his partner, who nodded before he stepped in. "We believe that Peter's dealings have attracted the attention of a criminal organization, and, well, there have been a few murders linked to it. We suspect that Peter might have been involved with some individuals who have a very violent agenda." The words hung in the air, each one like a hammer blow to Anna's chest. Peter was not just a man caught in an affair. He was involved with dangerous criminals, possibly even murderers, and his actions were now threatening her life as well. "Murders?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What does this have to do with me?" The shorter officer sighed, clearly uncomfortable with the direction this conversation had taken. "We're concerned for your safety, Mrs. Willard. These people don't leave loose ends. And from what we understand, Peter may have been trying to distance himself from them, possibly even planning to disappear himself, but we're worried that they might have come for him first. Anna felt like the world had turned upside down. She had thought Peter's betrayal had been the worst of it, but now she realized how wrong she was. He had betrayed her, yes, but in ways she never imagined, ways that could cost them both everything. "We need to know where he might be," the officer pressed. "If you've heard from him at all in the last few days, we need to know about it. We're trying to track him down before these people do." Anna took a step back, her mind racing. The thought of Peter's possible involvement in a murder, or even his own murder, was incomprehensible. He had never seemed like a violent man. But then, she had never seen this side of him. What was left of the man she had married? Was any part of him real, or had he been living a lie all these years? "I haven't heard from him," Anna said, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside her. "Not since he left. He left me a letter, a confession actually." Both officers leaned in, their attention sharp. The taller one raised an eyebrow. "A confession?" Anna nodded, her eyes distant as she recalled the words in Peter's letter, the lies, the betrayal, the dark secrets that had led him to this point. "Yes. He confessed to the affair, but he also admitted to embezzling money and working with someone who's been blackmailing him. He wrote that they might come after him, and he said he'd been meeting with them." The officers exchanged another look, their expressions hardening. It was clear now that Anna's marriage wasn't just falling apart. It had been a tangled web of crime and deception from the start. "This is bigger than just Peter's infidelity," the tall officer said, his tone grim. "If what he wrote is true, then there are people who are expecting to see him again, whether he's alive or dead. And if they think you know anything about where he's gone, they might come after you too." Anna felt a chill crawl up her spine. Her heart pounded in her chest as she thought of the danger now surrounding her, danger she hadn't even known existed until just moments ago. She was no longer just a wronged wife. She was caught in the midst of a criminal investigation, with Peter's secrets threatening to swallow her whole. She stared at the two officers, her mind reeling, the weight of their words settling in. The world she knew was gone. Peter had betrayed her in ways that went beyond infidelity, and now she would have to decide how to protect herself from the chaos he had unleashed, if it was even possible to protect herself at all. "Mrs. Willard," the tall officer said, his voice steady but with a note of concern, "we may need your help to track down your husband. We need to know everything you can about his activities, where he might be hiding, and anyone else who might be involved." Anna nodded slowly, but a part of her felt like she was drowning. She wasn't just dealing with the wreckage of her marriage anymore. She was dealing with a web of lies, crime, and murder, a web that might trap her if she wasn't careful, and in that moment she realized the truth. Peter hadn't just betrayed her. He had dragged her into a world she couldn't escape. The door to that world was closing fast, and Anna had no choice but to walk through it, whether she was ready or not.